Support for Central Florida Public Media comes from the Mustard Seed of Central Florida, a furniture and clothing bank that helps rebuild the lives of people who have experienced homelessness, natural disaster, or personal tragedy. For over 35 years, the Mustard Seed has been helping those in need. More at mustardseedfla.org.
Florida's abortion amendment fails at the ballot box. You're listening to The Wrap from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. Opponents of Amendment 4, which would have enshrined abortion rights up until the point of viability into the state constitution, are celebrating their victory. The amendment narrowly failed to reach the threshold of the needed 60% to pass. Vicki Matthews is the executive director of Choice's Women's Clinic, a pro-life Christian clinic in Central Florida. She was overjoyed to find out Florida did not pass the amendment.
On the front line, we deal with people in these devastating places who would not choose abortion unless it were legal. And so that we can have a law that will protect them from themselves, I'm thrilled about that.
A look at those efforts, that's ahead on The Wrap. The big stories this week from Central Florida Public Media. But first, these news headlines. The Orlando Utilities Commission unveiled revisions Tuesday to a proposed pricing plan for solar energy customers after pushback on its initial plan earlier this year. As Central Florida Public Media's environment reporter Molly Durig explains, critics say OUC's plans will still fail consumers.
A big point of contention with OUC's new energy pricing program is its lower cost savings rate for rooftop solar customers. OUC credits rooftop solar customers for extra power they send back to the electric grid at the same rate it costs to generate that power. Basically, a one-to-one transaction that would end under the peak shift proposal. OUC's revised plan would grandfather in existing solar energy customers, exempting them from the new program for 20 years. But Wendy Parker with Florida Solar Energy Industries Association says that's not good enough.
City of Orlando adopted these 2050 goals based on rooftop solar, and without net metering, that rooftop solar is essentially going to be, people are going to stop doing it because there's just not a financial incentive to put the solar on your roof.
OUC's Board of Commissioners will vote on the proposal December 10th. Molly Durig, Central Florida Public Media.
4 constitutional ballot measures in Florida received more than 50% of the vote, but they did not pass. That's because the state requires a supermajority to pass voter-led changes to the Constitution. Central Florida Public Media's Marion Summerall explains efforts to set the bar to 60% began back in 2004 when the Republican Party controlled the Florida legislature and amendments were being passed that the GOP did not support.
In 2006, a Florida amendment was proposed to change the threshold from 50 to 60%. It was approved with only about 58% support. While recent ballot initiatives like Amendment 4, which would protect abortion access, received 1.5 million more votes in support of it than against it, it did not meet the supermajority and therefore did not pass. UCF political scientist Aubrey Jewett says while some states do have a 60% threshold, it is only for some amendments. Florida is unique.
Florida is sort of in a league of its own when it comes to requiring 60%. We are, I would argue, certainly the most difficult to pass a constitutional amendment.
While the simple majority rule could return, Jewett says it would be difficult to change as it would need 60% of the vote. Marion Summerall, Central Florida Public Media.
Orlando's men and women's soccer teams are both seeing playoff action this weekend. First, the Orlando Pride take on the Chicago Red Stars Friday night in the National Women's Soccer League's quarterfinal matchup at Orlando's Intercompany Stadium. The Pride are the top seed in the playoffs. They ended their historic season, setting the record for most points scored in a single season at 60. Then Orlando City Soccer Club will face Inter Miami Sunday in a winner-take-all match, also at Intercompany Stadium, determining who moves on to Major League Soccer's Eastern Conference semifinal. It's the club's 10th season in the MLS. More local news stories, including election results, on our website. Visit cfpublic.org. In unincorporated Volusia County, some rural residents are still wading through water after Hurricane Milton flooded their roads and homes more than 2 weeks ago.
This is way past that. This is despair.
Now residents are asking their local government to stop new development. The latest in our continuing coverage of Hurricane Milton. Listen to new episodes of our podcast, Seen and Heard. Get it wherever you get this podcast. Opponents of Amendment 4 are celebrating after the ballot initiative was defeated. It would have enshrined into the state constitution access to an abortion up to viability, widely considered these days to be 24 weeks, but narrowly failed to reach the 60% of votes needed to pass. Central Florida Public Media's health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen spent election night at a watch party hosted by the Liberty Council of Florida, opponents of the measure, and brings us this story.
The sound was blaring as Celebration by Kool and the Gang played, and the Liberty Council's watch party quickly became a dance party of sorts after news began to spread that Amendment 4 had been defeated. While some danced, other supporters of the Vote No on Amendment 4 movement cheered and jumped in celebration. And then there was Vicki Matthews, who was crying.
I am incredibly overwhelmed that we're going to have this protection in Florida.
Matthews is the executive director of Choices Women's Clinic, a pro-life Christian clinic in Central Florida, and has been an advocate for the pro-life movement ever since she had an abortion over 40 years ago.
On the front line, we deal with people in these devastating places who would not choose abortion unless it were legal. And so that we can have a law that will protect them from themselves, I'm thrilled about that.
Matt Staver is the founder of the Liberty Council of Florida, which organized a massive ground floor movement against Amendment 4, placing Vote No on Amendment 4 signs all over the state and organizing protests. Staver says he even argued with the Florida Supreme Court over the amendment's inclusion on the November ballot, arguing it was too vaguely worded for voters to make an informed choice.
Everything was on the line. It was a huge victory to defeat Amendment 4 tonight.
Florida was one of 10 states that had abortion rights on the November general election ballot, and Florida is the first state to vote down an abortion amendment since 2022, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that abortion protections were not a constitutional right and returned that deciding power to the states.
And I believe that trend hopefully will continue across the country, but we're going to continue to fight for life and be a destination that's a sanctuary for life, for families, for women, especially for the unborn who are vulnerable, the most vulnerable among us.
While Staver is grateful the amendment didn't pass, he lingers on the voter support of 57% that Amendment 4 had.
I'm disturbed by how many people vote for this, but not surprised because the deception of this amendment is very difficult to understand when you're in the ballot box and you read it for the very first time.
He believes the term viability was not clearly defined in the ballot language. On the other side of the argument, Giovanna Sukovich was attending a Democratic watch party in downtown Orlando. She says the amendment's failure has her feeling gutted.
It's hard to even find the words, because I want to feel safe in my country. I want to feel safe when I'm visiting doctors and know that if I have the choice to have a child, I can do so safely and I don't need to risk my life having a baby.
Democratic Representative Anna Escamani worked with Floridians Protecting Freedom to get the amendment on the November ballot. She says she's saddened by the result, but hopeful because of the turnout Amendment 4 had.
We should be proud of the history that we made. 57% in any other state would pass. And that is something to take pride in.
That 57% is what Staver is now focusing on.
That means also that we have to do more education, and so we're going to continue to increase our educational efforts and also our resources that we provide to women and families.
9 other states voted on abortion rights Tuesday. Joe Mario Pedersen, Central Florida Public Media.
Nebraska and South Dakota joined Florida in voting to restrict abortion access. That's it for The Wrap this week. This podcast is produced by Central Florida Public Media with assistance from News Director Latoya Dennis and Digital Director Ryan Ellison. I'm Brendan Byrne. This is The Wrap.